The transport ship entered the academy docking bay with slow, heavy sound, as if even the metal walls were holding their breath. From inside, a small figure stepped out with a worn bag over his shoulder. He did not look around and wonder like the other new arrivals usually did. Instead, he observed everything in silence, his eyes moving carefully from one corner to another, as if mapping threats without even thinking about it. He was from a death world, a place where nothing stayed safe for long. On his planet, the ground itself could break open without warning, and the skies often carried storms that could tear apart weak shelters in minutes. Life there was not about comfort. It was about survival, moment by moment. People did not grow up with training academies or safe zones. They learned by falling, getting up, and not falling the same way again. Only the strong or the smart survived long enough to leave. The academy he had arrived at was one of the most respected in the entire region of space. It trained recruits from many worlds, each with their own strengths. Some came from high-gravity planets, others from ocean worlds or desert colonies. But even among them, the Deathworld boy stood out without trying. When the intake officer scanned him, they expected average results. Instead, his physical readings showed unusual endurance. His muscles responded faster than normal human limits. His reflexes were sharp, almost automatic. One officer quietly checked the equipment twice, thinking it must be a mistake, but there was no error. Still, the boy showed no pride. He did not ask questions about rankings or praise. When told where to go, he simply nodded and walked. Other recruits whispered as he passed, noticing how quiet he was. Some assumed he was nervous. Others thought he might be weak or broken in some way because he did not try to show off like the rest. But they were wrong. During the basic orientation, instructors explained the academy rules. They spoke about discipline, teamwork, and survival training. The boy listened carefully, standing still like a statue. Every word was absorbed without reaction. When told that training would push them to their limits, he did not react at all. For him, limits were not something that were set by others. Limits were something you discovered when your body finally refused to move. At night, while others rested and joked in their dorms, he remained awake for a long time, sitting near his bed. His eyes stayed open, calm but alert. Sleep came only after he confirmed every sound in the room, every shadow in the hallway, every possible point of danger. No one noticed yet, but something about him was different in a way the academy had not fully understood. He was not here to learn how to survive. He was already used to surviving. The academy was about to learn what that truly meant. The morning training hall was already full when the recruits gathered. The air was cold, and the ground was marked with old scars from thousands of past sparring sessions. Every new group that entered this place believed they were strong. Most of them stopped believing it after the first week. The Deathworld boy stood among them quietly. He did not stretch much or try to intimidate anyone. While others spoke in small groups, try to guess who would be the strongest. He simply watched the instructors and the space around him. His attention was not on people's words, but on their movement, their balance, their breathing. On his world, survival often depended on noticing things others ignored. Soon, the academy leader arrived. The room fell silent instantly. His presence alone was enough to pull every recruit into attention. He walked slowly across the hall, stopping in front of the group. His eyes scanned each face as if measuring their worth without a single word. Then he spoke clearly. In sparring, there will be no mercy. The words echoed through the hall. Some recruits straightened up, thinking it was a challenge meant to push their limits. Others smiled slightly, believing it was just a way to build confidence. But the meaning behind it was deeper than most of them understood. The leader continued, "You will not hold back. You will not protect pride or fear. You will fight as if every match decides survival." A few recruits exchanged nervous looks. In most training environments, sparring always had limits. Rules were there to prevent real harm. But here, the tone was different. Still, many assumed it was only spoken for motivation. The Deathworld boy did not assume anything. He took the words exactly as they were spoken. No mercy. No holding back. No hesitation. When the announcement ended, recruits were paired for their first sparring matches. The hall filled with controlled tension as teams formed. The instructors walked between them, watching closely. The boy was paired with a taller recruit from a heavy-gravity planet. The opponent cracked his neck, confident in his strength. He smiled slightly, as if expecting an easy match. Around them, others began their own sparring rounds, each one carefully controlled, still following unspoken habits of restraint. But not everyone followed those habits. When the signal was given, the hall erupted into movement. Most matches started with testing strikes, careful blocks, and measured steps. But in one corner of the hall, something was different. The Deathworld boy moved first. There was no warning, no hesitation. He stepped in with full commitment, not as practice, but as response. His opponent barely had time to react before the pressure changed completely. It was no longer a sparring rhythm. It felt like survival pressure, sharp and immediate. Nearby instructors began to notice. Their eyes shifted toward that corner, their expressions changing slowly from routine observation to alert focus. Something about that match did not feel like training anymore, and the boy, still calm, still focused, continued exactly as he understood the order. No mercy. The sparring hall grew louder as more matches continued, but one corner of the room had already started drawing attention. The Deathworld boy stood still for a brief moment, watching his opponent carefully. The other recruit looked confident at first, rolling his shoulders and stepping forward with a relaxed stance. He had trained under controlled conditions for years and believed he understood combat well enough. A whistle sounded, signaling the start. Most matches in the hall began with caution. Recruits tested each other with light strikes, careful blocks, and quick retreats. It was part of their training style. The idea was to learn control before pushing power. But in that corner, control was not the first thing that appeared. The moment the signal ended, the Deathworld boy moved. There was no slow build-up, no hesitation. He closed distance in a single motion, forcing the opponent to react immediately. The speed was unexpected, not just fast but direct, like there was no extra thought behind it. The opponent barely managed to raise his arms before the first impact came. It was not a wild attack. It was precise. Every movement had purpose, as if the boy was reacting to something far more serious than a practice match. His eyes stayed focused, calm, and steady, showing no emotion that could slow him down. The opponent tried to adjust, stepping back and circling to create space. But every attempt was answered instantly. The boy did not give room for reset or rhythm. He followed every movement like he already knew the next step in advance. Within seconds, the match stopped feeling like sparring and started feeling like a survival test. Nearby recruits began to slow down in their own matches. One by one, they noticed what was happening. Whispers started spreading across the hall. At first, it was confusion. Then it turned into concern. Instructors who had seen hundreds of training sessions over the years now stood with sharper attention. One of them even stepped closer, watching carefully, tried to understand if there had been a misunderstanding in instructions or if someone had broken the rules. But there were no rules broken. The command had been clear, no mercy. The Deathworld boy was simply following it in a way no one else expected. His opponent finally managed to land a defensive strike, but it did little to change the flow. The boy adjusted instantly, shifting his weight and closing the gap again. It was as if resistance itself was being absorbed and redirected without effort. The opponent's confidence started to fade, replaced with surprise and pressure. For the first time, the match was no longer about winning or losing in a controlled sense. It was about surviving each exchange long enough to breathe. Around them, the hall grew quieter. Even other sparring pairs slowed down, distracted by what they were seeing. The atmosphere shifted. What was supposed to be training now felt different, heavier, more intense. The instructors exchanged looks. Something important was becoming clear. The boy was not being aggressive for the sake of it. He was not trying to show off or dominate. He simply did not understand the idea of holding back in a situation where he had been told not to, and that difference was changing everything in the room. The sparring match continued, but now everyone was watching closely, realizing that this was not just another recruit learning combat. It was something far more unusual and possibly far more serious for the academy to handle. By the time the sparring round ended, The entire hall had changed its mood. What started as a normal training session now felt like something much heavier. Recruits stood in place longer than usual, watching the corner where the match had taken place. Some tried to act normal, but their eyes kept drifting back. The Deathworld boy stepped away from his opponent without celebration or emotion. His breathing was steady, like nothing unusual had happened. The other recruit, on the other hand, was clearly shaken. He stayed still for a moment, tried to understand what had just gone wrong. It was not just losing. It was a feeling that the match had never been on equal ground in the first place. Instructors quickly moved in and signaled for the next pair, but their attention was no longer fully on the schedule. One of them asked the boy to step aside for observation. The boy obeyed without question and moved to the edge of the hall, standing quietly as before. Whispers began spreading among the recruits. Some said he was dangerous. Others said he was cheating. A few simply said he did not understand control. But none of these explanations fully matched what had been seen. The problem was not lack of skill. It was something deeper. Later, in a separate room, the instructors gathered. The academy leader was also present now. Screens replayed parts of the sparring match. Every movement was analyzed carefully. Slow motion showed how fast the boy reacted, how directly he closed distance, and how he never once hesitated after command was given. One instructor finally spoke. The voice was careful. He is following the order exactly. There was silence after that. The leader leaned slightly forward, watching the replay again. The words "no mercy" had been given as a training principle, meant to remove hesitation and build confidence in combat. But what they were seeing now was something else. The boy was not interpreting it as a guideline. He was treating it as a survival condition. Another instructor added, "On most worlds, sparring is still controlled. Even when we say no mercy, there is always an unspoken limit." The leader's expression stayed firm, but his eyes showed thought. "He does not have that limit," he said quietly. Back in the hall, training continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Recruits were more careful now, watching each other differently. Some tried to match the boy's intensity, but most found it difficult to maintain that level without hesitation. The difference between controlled training and instinctive survival was becoming clear to everyone. The boy, meanwhile, remained at the edge of the hall, waiting for further instruction. He did not question why he was separated. He did not assume anything was wrong. In his mind, he had simply followed what was told. But now, for the first time since his arrival, the academy was not just observing him. It was trying to understand him. And slowly, an uncomfortable realization was forming among the instructors. If a single command could change a recruit's behavior this completely, then the academy might have to rethink not just its rules, but the way it trained everyone inside its walls. The academy remained unusually quiet the next day. Word about the sparring incident had already spread through almost every training block. Recruits looked at each other differently now, as if everyone was trying to understand where the real limit of strength actually was. The Deathworld boy was called again to the training hall, but this time the atmosphere was not the same. Instructors stood in a loose circle, not to intimidate him, but to observe more carefully. The academy leader was also present, watching without interruption. The boy entered and stopped at the center when told. His posture was the same as before, calm, steady, and alert. He showed no sign of fear or pride. To him, this was just another instruction. The leader finally spoke. "You followed the order given yesterday," he said. The boy simply nodded. "Yes." There was no hesitation in his answer. A long silence followed. Some instructors exchanged quiet looks. It was clear now that the issue was not disobedience. It was interpretation. On most worlds, training words carried hidden meaning, softened by safety rules and culture. But on a death world, words were often direct. If something was said, it meant exactly that. The leader stepped closer. "When we say no mercy in sparring," he explained slowly, "we mean no holding back in skill, not to cause real harm. There is always control." The boy listened carefully. For the first time, there was a slight shift in his eyes, like he was adjusting a concept that did not exist in his experience before. "In your world," the leader continued, "was there ever sparring like this? The boy paused for a moment before answering. No, he said honestly. If you hesitate, you don't get up again. The room grew quiet again. That single sentence explained more than any report could. It was not aggression that shaped him. It was environment. The academy leader slowly turned toward the other instructors. This is not just a strong recruit, he said. This is a different way of thinking. Instead of punishment or removal, a new decision began forming. The academy could either try to force him into their system or learn from what he brought with him. After short discussion, the decision became clear. The boy would not be removed. He would be trained differently. Over the following days, sparring rules were adjusted for him, not to limit him unfairly, but to teach balance. He was shown how restraint could exist without weakness. At first, it was unfamiliar. He often paused too late or acted too early. But slowly, he began to understand the difference between survival instinct and controlled strength. At the same time, other recruits also changed, watching him force them to rethink their own limits. They realized they had been training safely, but not always realistically. The academy itself started shifting. Instructors began redesigning sessions, adding more real pressure while still maintaining safety. The goal was no longer just discipline. It was understanding how different kinds of survival shape different kinds of warriors. The Deathworld boy did not become a symbol by choice. He simply existed as he was. But in doing so, he changed the way people around him saw strength. And in a place built to create warriors, that change mattered more than anyone expected.